probably when some of your parents were born, about right. And I don't know, there's some things that I hope you appreciate about this school, and that's pretty much what I'm gonna talk to you about today. So you get guest speakers every once in a while, and you take away from it whatever you put into it, right? If you listen or not, whatever. So what was the bell ringer today? Was this the one for?
It was how we behave during a guest speaker.
Well, that'll work. So you're on the right foot, that's good. Ask questions, that's how you behave. And if you have questions, you raise your hands and you go from there. I'm gonna tell you the same thing your mom and dad, or your aunt and your uncle, or your grandma and your grandpa, and every teacher you've had since kindergarten. You guys remember your kindergarten teachers? In the South. There was a little red house in Gilmer, Texas. She was my kindergarten teacher. And I can remember almost every teacher I had here. And my junior English teacher was Miss Case. And we did American literature. And I learned that I had to memorize the Gettysburg Address, which was a very good thing. It's one of the finest speeches given in the world, in the history of the world. And those are good things. You are in this classroom where 6 billion people want to be and cannot be here. I mean that. So when you think, oh man, I hate going to school, there are people who walk across a desert with no water and with very little food. There are people who will get on a boat without a motor and set it afloat and hope that they and or their children can get to Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, or Europe. And you got here to be here on your own for free. You don't know it, but because you're sitting in this chair, you won the lottery. You got a better deal than the lottery, because not only do you get the lottery, but you get free room and board with your parents. They pay your room and board, don't they? You get free room and board for 18 years, and we, taxpayers, I pay taxes. I'm happy to pay taxes, because taxes go to this school. They go to roads. Do you guys like bumpy roads? No, I like some nice smooth roads. Nice smooth roads are expensive. Schools are expensive. We pay taxes. Do you know how much it costs us to pay for you to come to this school? How much we have, you will say you forced me to come. Yes, we have forced you to come, but it's a good for you. We parents do what's good for you, right? How much has your school cost for the citizens of Pampa for you to come to Pampa, dear old Pampa High School? Anybody? This is the participation part. This is being polite to your guest speaker. Guess, how much?
A lot.
Give me a number. A lot is 2 words. A space lot. So just in case you guys are still writing, I learned that in 7th grade from Miss Ellis. A lot. How much?
Billions.
No, it's not billion. Now you're just being silly, but that's close. At least you're guessing. How much?
No clue.
No clue. Guess.
500,000.
500,000. At least you're in the right ballpark. $100,000. That's a house. Instead of giving you a Lamborghini as a present when you were 1 or 6, instead of giving you a house, we said we're going to give you an education. And this is something that not everybody can do. Like I said, those people walk across the desert to get here. They will get into the boat. My next door neighbor in Rockwall, Texas, and they want to come not only to America, but the smart ones want to come to Texas. Okay? I've lived in California. Their roads are worse, their schools are worse, their taxes are higher. Why would anybody live in California? I don't know. Guess what the Californians are doing? They're moving to Texas. I only ask that they don't California my Texas, okay? Because it's easy to do that, okay? I'm gonna talk about how easy. So this isn't just my story. This isn't Miss West's story. This is our story. You're gonna tell this story to your children, I hope. This is a great, this is a story in America that very few people get to tell their children, not from America. I mean, the French don't get to tell this story. Don't get me wrong, France is a wonderful place. Britain is a wonderful place. I've lived in England for a year at Oxford. I've gone to a school that was 1,000 years old, and it was fun for a year. And then I came home. And when I got out of the military, having entered the military from Texas, having voted in Texas my whole life because I was a Texas citizen, I came back to Texas. And for about 5 years, I taught school. I taught IPC, I taught chemistry, I taught physics. Okay? And after 5 years, I went on to be an engineer because I had that flexibility because I went to American schools and I got an American education, and that was available to me. Okay? So, you've won the lottery. I may never convince you of that. You may have to go. I visited 21 countries. I have seen their schools. I have seen their orphanages. I have seen their downtowns. I have lived in 23 zip codes. I have lived in Maryland, Virginia, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, California, that's where the Navy base was. I lived in Nevada. I lived in Rhode Island. And this is a pretty good place to be. Do you know how many towns have a homecoming parade, even in Texas? Not that many. Rockwall doesn't have one because Rockwall's got 2 high schools. When would they have the parade? They both have to play at the same stadium, so it would be 2 homecoming parades. You can't do that. You guys get one. There's 1 parade. It's pretty cool. Do you know how many countries even have homecoming parades, even if they could have them? There wasn't a homecoming parade in England the year I was there. They didn't get together in sports like we do, and it's not just football. When you do football, there's the cheerleaders, there's the flag squad, there's the band, and there's you and all of your 267 best friends, because that's about how many are in your class, are all there hanging out together on a Friday night, aren't you? Dang, that's a good life. You guys don't have to go chop cotton like my mom did when she was in high school in a little place called rural Texas, because you had to chop cotton. Okay, you had to get the weeds out of the cotton, or there was weeds in the cotton, and then you had to go pick the cotton. Okay, she and her grandpa were sharecroppers. Anyway, our story has only gotten better, but our story is a very thin slice of civilization. It's very thin in the world right now, and it's a very thin slice in time right now. There have been schools for 2,500 years. And you guys know the dude who taught the first one. You just didn't know that he was teaching the first one. I'm going to say a name, and you say the word that comes after it. Pythagorean. I didn't hear it. I'm deaf. Theorem. Yeah, he was a Greek. 2,400 years, Pythagoras had a school. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. They had slaves. Everybody had slaves. Everybody in the history of the world has had slaves. I cannot think of the indigenous people anywhere who did not have slaves. I think some of the Maoran and Polynesian tribes who lived on an island might not have had slaves. But everybody's had slaves, and we're getting past that. Okay? And we're doing better. And guess what? This is such a great country that about 11 million people have immigrated here as Africans so they could be African Americans so that their kids could sit in our classrooms. Okay? This is a good place to be. And Pampa is one of the best places in America. You narrow it down to Texas, and then you look at towns. Pampa's is a great place to be. Borger's a good place too. Trust me, when you're halfway around the world in this miserable place, and it's 130 degrees outside, it's the United Arab Emirates, it's in a little port called Jebel Ali, they are one of the Emirates, and you meet a dude from Borger, you and he are best friends, because you know what to talk about, okay? So your second best friend, your first best friend is anybody from Pampa, your second one is anybody from the Panhandle, your third one is anyone from Texas, which is a good thing that we have these groups, okay? There's a lot of really good literature out there. One of the books you may hear about is Alex de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Dude was a Frenchman, came over here, wrote a book about America, and one of the things he noticed was we hang out with other Americans in groups, and we talk about it, and we are in equal in opportunity. And back then, we had the best jails in the world. They were the most modern jails, and they treated people the most leniently, and they got them out of jail and hopefully helped them get back to work. Okay? And it is still a classic on why America, and he wrote in this book, almost 200 years before it happened, why America was going to do better than Russia. Because while we had slavery and Russia had serfs, he saw there was more room to grow in America than there was in Russia. That we would do things with freedom and freedom of choice that the Russians weren't going to do. And you don't read old literature because it's old. There were 1,000 books written that year that he wrote that one. You read those books because they are timeless. What he wrote about America and Russia would apply to any nation in the world if you did what America did or what Russia did. When I want to think about what America is going to do next, I read history books. I read history books about the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire, but the Roman Republic. Storm Before the Storm by Mike Duckman. Read that in the last year. I read stories about the American Revolution. There's 1776. There's biographies on George Washington. I read about Abraham Lincoln. I read about the French Revolution. I read about Napoleon. Anybody want to do the French Revolution thing? It really sucked. Okay? First they killed all the nobility. Then they killed the king. Then they killed all the clergy they could get their hands on. Then they stole all the churches and all the property out of the churches and outlawed the Catholic churches in France. And then they started killing each other because that's all that was left. Guy Robespierre was leading the charge and sending people to this brand new contraption called a guillotine. And he got so crazy and wacky that they finally took a step back and said, you know what? I think he's part of the problem now. And they sent him. And what was their solution when you have anarchy like that consumes a country? Almost every single time you get a Napoleon dictator, you get an Adolf Hitler dictator, you get somebody else. You get a King Henry IV dictator, you get a King Louis IV. Every country has had one of those except for one country. And that would be us. Because instead of Napoleon, we had this guy named George Washington. Yeah, he owned slaves. But he is the only man in history, I can think of one other, but you have to come up with somebody else's name. I can come up with two names that have done something along those lines that led a country out of a situation like that and established something that was long lasting and that was better than it was before. And there are really only about 3, maybe 4 people like that in the history of everybody in the world. Okay? Moses. Some people don't think there was a Moses. I'm gonna go with Moses. Cincinnatus was a Roman dictator. Back then, dictator was just for 1 year. They took over for 1 year. He fought the battle, and then it went back to the Senate. They had a Senate, and then they had the popular ruling. And you took over for dictator for a year, and then you were supposed to give it up and walk away. And very few dictators did. Sulla was a dictator, Marius was a dictator, and they decided they were gonna hang around and kill anybody who disagreed with them. And that's what happened to the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar finally came in, and he killed people who didn't agree with him. None of those guys were Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus went back to the farm after he fought the battle he was hired to fight. George Washington went back to the farm in 1783 and said, you guys need to run this. And it was one of the very few times in history anybody did that. And then we tried to run it. And so far, knock on wood, because you knock on wood for luck, 250 years later, we still have a pretty good school system here, don't we? Wow. Napoleon, I'm glad we didn't do the Napoleon round. Okay? There are 2 others in 2 other nations. We're going to have to see how this one plays out. I'm not sure how it's going to play out in South Africa, but Nelson Mandela tried to do that in South Africa. Gandhi tried to do it in India, and they haven't quite been as successful as us yet, but it's only been about 50 to 60 years. Let's give them a while to see where they can find their footing. Okay? And almost everybody in Europe has looked at what we did and said, oh, that looks pretty good. I think I'd like to be a republic. I don't want to be a king anymore. I'll give you there's these points in history where things happen like this. And you read about them. A great book on World War I is The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. And it talks about it. But there's 3 people who really started World War I because of their personalities. The Kaiser, who was the king. Kaiser, in case you didn't know, is the way that you're supposed to pronounce Julius Caesar. It's not Julius Caesar, it's Julius Caesar. Okay? It was a K sound in Latin. The Kaiser of Germany, Nicky of Russia, and George of England. They were all cousins. They were all grandchildren of Queen Victoria. And they started the war, and yet none of them were at the peace talks. At the end of the war, it was Lloyd George who finished up, Balfour, and the general that they can find in Germany to negotiate the peace. So the kingdoms were really gone finally in World War I, and that's what we call an inflection point, where things change so much so fast that it's different at the end of it. Okay? You'll hear about it. 1648 was Westphalia, which is where nations quit fighting over religion in Europe, for crying out loud. Whoever is the king, he gets to make the rules. That was a big deal because people were fighting over that in Europe, killing each other. 1848 was a big year for revolutions in Europe. Now we think about 1860s and our Civil War, but that's when a lot of them said, hey, I want to be more like a republic. And they became more like a republic, which was more like us than being more like King Louis XIV. And to a large degree, that's worked out. People who are like us, who become republics in the West, have done better than people who are in the East or in the Far East. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And one of them is, believe it or not, because there's a string in every one of you that rebels just this much in America. You find a better way to do things. And I'll give you an example. if you are a teacher in China, there was one, and I can speak about China, I have visited China, and my children are adopted, who I love, are from China. And I've seen what the Chinese have to offer us. If you disagree with the principal in China, the next day you might be fired. They control you. You guys know there's students protesting in Hong Kong right now, right? You guys heard about that? There are kids your age and a little bit older, maybe in college, who, why do kids protest? You don't have anything to lose. Sorry, you don't have a family, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have kids. Okay, old guys like me, it's a little harder for me to protest, because you may come after my family, right? Okay, so they're protesting in Hong Kong, and all they want to do is they want to keep what they had, and they just lost it. So if you're a protester in Hong Kong and you're protesting for what you call democracy, which is really a republic, which is really voting for representatives, but we call it democracy now. If you want to protest for that, you will almost certainly never have a good job in Hong Kong after this is over, and I can't help it. The US military, the US government, the West, we have decided that we're not going there. So they are doing to their people what they have done to their nation. Whereas we are like, hey, if you want to protest, we think that's fine, but when you break the glasses, now it's a riot. Don't break the glasses. Some people say it's okay to break glasses, and so you break glasses, but somebody's got to fix the glasses. That's okay. We're going to figure this out. It's not nearly as bad right now with the riots in America as it was in 1968. There were bombs going off everywhere in 1968. A lot of them. 40 or 50 bombs. There was a bomb in the Pentagon. Somebody decided they wanted to blow up the Pentagon. They weren't very smart. They didn't blow up anything. The Pentagon's is a concrete fortress like this school. But anyway. So, that's where you come. That's what you've got behind you. You have this little bitty thin veneer that I'm going to try to tell you, we can lose this. And we, because you guys are going to be part of this, we can mess this up in about 30 years and turn into something like Venezuela. Or we can turn into something like Napoleonic France. We can turn into a lot of things that you really look at back at and go, wow, I wish I'd read that book on the Roman Republic. Because a country that does not remember their history, who does not know these things, who does not know other people's history, you're shooting blind in the dark, aren't you? It's like going into 12th grade and not having had 11th grade. You don't know what's coming. All right? Let me see. So, I had a good run. I had a good life. I'll talk to you a little bit about the life, and then I want to talk to you about 2 mistakes I don't want to see us make. I'm going to talk about a tale of 2 countries. One of them is East Germany, and the other one is Venezuela. I could just as easily tell the story about Cuba.